Well, folks, pull up a chair. I need to talk to you about something that happened this week at the White House that tells you everything about the Trump family, about Melania's role in this administration, about the performative nature of political spectacle, and about what happens when someone who clearly doesn't want to be First Lady is forced into that role because her husband won the presidency again. And it involves a Christmas tree, and 3 minutes, and a level of visible contempt that's actually stunning, even by Trump family standards. Melania Trump was supposed to host the annual White House Christmas tree arrival ceremony. This is tradition. This is one of those ceremonial duties that First Ladies perform. It's not difficult. It's not demanding. You stand there. You smile. You receive the tree. You pose for photos. You say a few words about holiday spirit and American traditions. You shake some hands. You spend maybe 30 minutes being gracious and welcoming. That's it. That's the job. And Melania couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it. Showed up for less than 3 minutes. Said almost nothing. Spent more time acknowledging the Clydesdale horses than the people. Looked like she wanted to be literally anywhere else. Displayed contempt so visible, so palpable, so undeniable that even people who try to give her benefit of the doubt had to acknowledge that she clearly hates this role and makes no effort to hide it. Now, I want to be clear about something before we dive deeper into this story. I don't feel sorry for Melania Trump. I don't think she's a victim. I don't think we should sympathize with her discomfort at having to occasionally show up for White House events. She made choices that led her here. She chose to marry Donald Trump. She chose to support his political ambitions. She chose to campaign for him, however reluctantly. She chose this life, and if she's unhappy, she has options. She could leave, could get divorced, could stop enabling his corruption and cruelty, but she doesn't. So her visible contempt at having to perform basic ceremonial duties doesn't earn my sympathy. But her behavior does tell us something important about the Trump family, about how they view public service, about the difference between performing duties and actually caring about them, about what happens when you're in positions of power, not because you want to serve, but because you want the benefits that come with power. And understanding that matters for understanding who the Trumps are and what they represent. Let me walk through what actually happened at this Christmas tree ceremony, because the details matter. Because seeing exactly how Melania behaved reveals the contempt more clearly than any summary can. The ceremony is supposed to last about an hour. That's traditional. The tree arrives. There are photographers. There are tourists who've come to see this moment. There are reporters. There's the military band. There are the people who transported the tree. There are officials from the tree farm. It's a whole production, a celebration, a moment of holiday spirit, a chance for the First Lady to represent grace and warmth and American hospitality. Melania showed up, briefly acknowledged people, said, "Nice to see you. Thank you. Have a beautiful day." Beautiful. In a flat tone that suggested she meant none of it. Looked at the tree. Said, "It's a beautiful tree," without conviction. Asked someone, "How are you?" without waiting for or caring about the answer. Said, "Great job" to someone. Asked, "You remember my son?" to someone else, and then left. Spent less than 3 minutes total at a ceremony designed to last an hour. Think about that. Think about what that communicates. This is the First Lady of the United States. This is someone whose job, whose role, whose responsibility is to represent American values and hospitality and grace. And she can't be bothered to spend more than 3 minutes at a Christmas tree ceremony. Can't pretend to care for even 30 minutes. Can't fake enthusiasm long enough to fulfill basic ceremonial obligations. And it's not like this was some grueling physical ordeal. She didn't have to chop down the tree herself. Didn't have to carry it into the White House. Didn't have to decorate it. Just had to stand there, be pleasant, say nice things, pose for photos, express holiday spirit for maybe 30 minutes. And she couldn't do it, or wouldn't do it. Just showed up, went through the absolute minimum motions, and left as quickly as possible. The contempt is visible, is undeniable, is so obvious that you can see it in her face, hear it in her tone, feel it in how quickly she exits. She's not even trying to hide it, not making any effort to pretend she wants to be there, just fulfilling the bare minimum requirement so she can say she showed up and then getting out as fast as possible. And honestly, that's almost insulting. To the people who came to see this moment, to the tourists who wanted to experience holiday spirit at the White House, to the reporters covering the event, to the military band that performed, to everyone who put time and effort into making this ceremony happen, Melania couldn't be bothered to give them even 30 minutes of her time. Couldn't fake caring for even that long. Now, this isn't the first time Melania has displayed this kind of contempt for her role. This is a pattern. This is who she is. This is how she approaches being First Lady. With visible reluctance, with minimal effort, with clear desire to be anywhere else, doing anything else. Remember, during Trump's first term when Melania refused to live in the White House? Stayed in Trump Tower in New York instead? That cost taxpayers millions in extra security. Millions of dollars spent protecting the First Lady who refused to fulfill the traditional role of actually living in the White House with her husband. And why did she refuse? Because she didn't want to be there. Didn't want to be First Lady. Didn't want the job her husband's election forced her into. And during the campaign last year, reporters revealed that Melania refused to campaign with Trump, wouldn't appear at rallies, wouldn't do campaign events, would only agree to show up on stage if Trump actually won. In other words, she'd fulfill the absolute minimum obligation if forced to, but wouldn't do anything beyond that. Wouldn't help him campaign, wouldn't support his effort to win, would just show up for the victory celebration if it happened and otherwise wanted nothing to do with it. That tells you everything about Melania's approach to this role. She does the absolute minimum required, shows up when she has to, spends as little time as possible, makes no effort to hide her contempt, and otherwise stays as far away as possible from the duties and responsibilities of being First Lady. And look, I get it. Being First Lady is hard. Michelle Obama, one of America's greatest First Ladies, someone who approached the role with grace and commitment and genuine care, said the White House life can be hell, said the constant scrutiny is difficult, said every tiny detail gets examined, said the pressure is enormous. And she's right. It is hard. The expectations are high. The scrutiny is constant. The demands are significant. But Michelle Obama still did the job, still showed up, still fulfilled responsibilities, still represented America with grace and warmth, still cared about the role even when it was difficult, still made efforts to connect with people and serve the country, because that's what the position requires. That's what Americans deserve from their First Lady. Melania does none of that, doesn't care about the role, doesn't make efforts to fulfill it properly, doesn't hide her contempt for the position, just shows up occasionally when absolutely required, does the bare minimum, and leaves. And apparently thinks that's acceptable, thinks Americans should be satisfied with a First Lady who visibly doesn't want to be there and makes no effort to perform the duties properly. And you know what? That's insulting. To Americans, to the institution, to the role itself. If you don't want to be First Lady, fine, don't be First Lady. Get divorced, leave. Don't force America to watch you perform contempt at ceremonial events. Don't make us witness your visible disdain for responsibilities you chose by staying married to someone who sought and won the presidency. Now, let me talk about the Michael Wolff situation, because that adds another layer to understanding who Melania is and how she operates. Michael Wolff published a book this year alleging that Melania openly loathes her husband, claims she can't stand him, says her marriage is purely transactional. Also wrote that Melania was close with Jeffrey Epstein. That's how she met Trump in the first place. Melania didn't like that, threatened to sue Wolff for over $1 billion if he didn't retract his statements. $1 billion. That's the demand. For a book that says she doesn't like her husband and knew Epstein. $1 billion in damages. But here's what's interesting. Wolff said, fine, let's go to court. Said he welcomes the lawsuit. Because going to court means depositions, means putting Melania and Donald under oath, means asking them questions about Epstein, about their relationship, about all the things they'd rather not discuss publicly. Wolff is calling Melania's bluff, saying if you want to sue, let's do it. Let's put everything on the record. Let's see what you're willing to say under oath. And notice what Melania objected to. She threatened to sue over the Epstein allegations, over claims about how she met Trump, over suggestions about those relationships. But she didn't threaten to sue over Wolff's core thesis that she loathes her husband. didn't object to claims that her marriage is miserable, didn't dispute characterizations of her as being trapped in a relationship she hates. Why not? Maybe because there's too much evidence. Maybe because everyone can see it's true. Maybe because even Melania knows you can't successfully sue someone for saying things that are obviously accurate. Remember the footage from Israel during Trump's first term, when Trump reached for Melania's hand and she slapped it away, on camera, in public, with world leaders watching? That moment of visible contempt for her husband that went viral. You can't sue someone for saying you don't like your husband when there's video of you publicly rejecting his attempts at affection. Can't claim the characterization is false when your own behavior confirms it. So Melania didn't object to that part of Wolf's book, just to the Epstein stuff, just to the allegations that might actually be harder to prove or that carry more serious implications. That tells you something too. Tells you that even Melania knows the claims about her loathing Donald are defensible, are supported by evidence, are things she can't successfully dispute. So she focuses on the Epstein allegations instead, on things she thinks she might be able to challenge, while tacitly accepting that yes, everyone knows she hates being First Lady and can't stand her husband. Now, there's a temptation to sympathize with Melania, to see her as a victim, to feel sorry for someone who's clearly trapped in a role she doesn't want. And I understand that temptation. There's something inherently sympathetic about watching someone be visibly miserable in their circumstances. But I resist that sympathy, for several reasons. First, Melania chose this. She chose to marry Trump. She knew who he was. She knew what he wanted. She made that choice as an adult. She could have chosen differently. She still could choose differently. She has options, has resources, could leave, could get divorced, could free herself from this role she clearly hates. But she doesn't. She stays. She continues enabling Trump. She continues performing the role, however, minimally. She's made her choices and continues making them. Second, Melania is not a helpless victim. She's a wealthy woman with access to resources and options most people don't have. She's not trapped by economic necessity. Isn't staying because she has no other choices. She's staying because whatever benefits she gets from being married to Trump, from being First Lady, from the wealth and status and position, those apparently outweigh the costs of having to occasionally show up for White House events she hates. That's a calculation. That's a choice. And if she's choosing to stay despite being miserable, that's on her. She's decided that whatever she gets from this arrangement is worth the price of visible misery at Christmas tree ceremonies. I'm not going to feel sorry for someone making that calculation. Someone choosing wealth and status over personal happiness and then complaining about it. Third, and most importantly, Melania's contempt for her role has real consequences, real costs for America, for the institution of the presidency, for the people who deserve better from their First Lady. Her visible disdain communicates something to Americans, communicates that public service doesn't matter, that ceremonial duties are beneath her, that Americans aren't worth even 30 minutes of her time, that the position of First Lady is just something to endure rather than an opportunity to serve. That's damaging. That undermines the institution. That shows contempt not just for the role, but for America itself. And I won't sympathize with that, won't excuse it, won't pretend it's understandable or acceptable. If you don't want to be First Lady, don't be First Lady. But if you're going to hold the position, do the damn job, show up, make efforts, pretend to care, fulfill the responsibilities. Don't insult Americans by displaying visible contempt at basic ceremonial events. Let me talk about what this reveals about the Trump family generally. Because Melania's behavior isn't anomalous, isn't unique to her. It's characteristic of how the entire Trump family approaches power and public service. They want the benefits, want the status, want the wealth and influence and attention, but they don't want to do the work, don't want to fulfill responsibilities, don't want to actually serve anyone but themselves. Look at how Trump approaches being president. He doesn't do the work, doesn't read briefings, doesn't attend meetings unless forced to, spends enormous amounts of time watching television and posting on social media, uses the presidency to enrich himself and his family, makes decisions based on personal benefit rather than national interest, views the office as something that serves him rather than something he serves through. That's the Trump family approach to power. Take the benefits, avoid the work, use positions for personal enrichment, display contempt for actual service, and expect everyone to accept it because you're wealthy and powerful and think rules don't apply to you. Melania's 3-minute appearance at a Christmas tree ceremony is just another example of that pattern. Another illustration of how the Trumps view public service as something to extract value from rather than as something to contribute through, as something that serves them rather than as something they serve through, as something to be endured with visible contempt rather than as something to approach with commitment and grace. And that's why Melania's behavior matters, not just because it's rude or lazy or contemptuous, but because it reveals the Trump family's fundamental approach to power, their belief that positions exist to benefit them, their contempt for actual service, their willingness to take all the advantages while avoiding all the responsibilities, their calculation that they can display disdain openly and face no real consequences because they're wealthy and powerful enough to get away with it. That's not conservatism. That's not any political ideology. That's just corruption. That's using public positions for private benefit while showing contempt for public service. That's everything wrong with how the wealthy and powerful often approach politics. Taking without giving, using without serving, benefiting without contributing, and expecting everyone to accept it because challenging them is too difficult or costly. Now, I want to address the economics of this, because people might think Melania showing up for 3 minutes at a Christmas tree ceremony is trivial. Doesn't matter. Isn't worth discussing. Just personal behavior that has no broader significance. But it does matter. Does have implications for how power operates, for what Americans can expect from their leaders, for whether public service means anything beyond personal enrichment. I've spent 80 years investing, 80 years watching how leadership affects organizations, how commitment from the top cascades through institutions, how contempt from leadership breeds contempt throughout systems, how leaders who don't care about their roles create cultures where nobody cares, where everyone just extracts what they can while contributing as little as possible. That's toxic. That destroys organizations. That makes institutions ineffective. That creates environments where nothing works properly because nobody's actually committed to making things work. They're all just going through motions while extracting benefits, all calculating minimum effort required while maximizing personal gain, all displaying the same contempt for service that leadership models. And that's what Trump family leadership creates. Throughout government, throughout institutions they control, a culture of extraction rather than service, of taking rather than giving, of contempt rather than commitment, of minimum effort rather than genuine care. Because that's what they model. That's what they demonstrate. That's what they reward. Melania spending 3 minutes at a Christmas tree ceremony instead of 30 communicates something to everyone in government. Communicates that service doesn't matter, that responsibilities are just inconveniences to be minimized, that public duties are beneath you and should be avoided whenever possible, that Americans aren't worth your time or effort, that the position exists to serve you rather than for you to serve through it. That cascades, that spreads, that becomes how everyone operates. And the result is government that doesn't work, institutions that don't serve, systems that extract rather than contribute. That's the Trump family legacy. Not just their personal corruption, but the culture of corruption they create throughout everything they control. That has economic costs, real costs. Government that doesn't work is expensive, is inefficient, wastes resources, fails to deliver services, creates problems rather than solving them. And all of that is paid for by ordinary Americans, through taxes, through reduced services, through institutional dysfunction, through the accumulated cost of leadership that doesn't care. So Melania's 3 minutes at the Christmas tree ceremony isn't trivial, isn't just personal rudeness. It's symbolic of larger dysfunction, of leadership that models contempt for service, of institutions being destroyed from within by people who don't care about them, of costs that everyone pays when leaders view positions as things to extract value from rather than as responsibilities to fulfill. Let me bring this to a conclusion by talking about what Americans deserve, what they should expect from their First Lady, what standards should apply to people holding positions of public trust. because it's not what the Trumps provide, not what Melania demonstrates, not what we're getting from this administration. Americans deserve leaders who care, who show up, who fulfill responsibilities, who approach public service as opportunity rather than as burden, who spend 30 minutes at Christmas tree ceremonies because that's part of the job and the job matters, who don't display visible contempt for the people they're supposed to serve, who understand that holding positions of power comes with obligations that should be taken seriously. That's not too much to ask. That's basic. That's minimum standard for public service. And Melania can't meet it, won't meet it, doesn't think she should have to meet it. Just shows up for 3 minutes and leaves. Displays contempt openly, makes no effort to hide disdain for role and responsibilities, and apparently thinks that's acceptable. It's not. It's insulting, it's damaging, it's destructive to institutions and to the culture of public service. And Americans should demand better, should expect better, should refuse to accept that someone can hold position of First Lady while displaying such obvious contempt for what that position requires. But demanding better requires recognizing what we're seeing, requires calling it out, requires not making excuses or sympathizing with someone who's choosing this role while hating it, requires being honest about the Trump family's approach to power and service and responsibility, requires acknowledging that this isn't normal, isn't acceptable, isn't what Americans deserve from their leaders. That's why Melania's 3-minute appearance matters, why it's worth discussing, why it reveals something important about who the Trumps are and how they operate, not because it's scandalous in dramatic sense, but because it's revealing in honest sense, because it shows exactly how little they care, how much contempt they have, how differently they view public service compared to what it should be. And if Americans accept this, if we normalize it, if we excuse it or sympathize with it or pretend it doesn't matter, then we're accepting that public service doesn't mean anything, that leaders don't have to care, that positions exist for personal benefit rather than for serving others, that contempt for responsibility is acceptable as long as you're wealthy and powerful. I won't accept that, won't excuse it, won't sympathize with someone who chooses a role while displaying contempt for it, won't pretend 3 minutes at a Christmas tree ceremony is adequate when Americans deserve 30, won't normalize the Trump family's approach to power as something other than the corruption and contempt it actually represents. That's the standard. That's what this moment requires. Honesty about what we're seeing, refusal to make excuses, willingness to demand better, commitment to holding leaders accountable for not just their corrupt actions, but also for their contemptuous attitudes, for showing up or not showing up, for caring or not caring, for serving or just extracting. Melania Trump spent 3 minutes at a Christmas tree ceremony. That tells you everything you need to know about her husband, about their family, and about how they view public service, as something to endure minimally rather than as something to approach with commitment, as burden rather than opportunity, as something that serves them rather than as something they serve through. And Americans deserve better, deserve leaders who care, who show up, who fulfill responsibilities properly, who don't display contempt openly, who understand that positions of trust come with obligations that matter. That's not too much to ask. That's what public service should mean. And settling for less is accepting that corruption and contempt are normal rather than demanding that service and commitment be restored. Retry.